The crystal ballroom at the Meridian Hotel sparkled with 40 years of love and celebration as 300 guests gathered for my parents' ruby anniversary. Red roses cascaded from every centerpiece, and the dance floor gleamed under chandeliers that had witnessed countless marriages, anniversaries, and milestone celebrations. I sat at table 15, not quite the family table, but close enough to hear every speech and toast. My cousins dominated the conversations around me, their voices carrying the confident tones of people accustomed to success. Daniel discussed his latest merger at Goldman Sachs. Sarah described her promotion to partner at her law firm. Michael regaled anyone listening with stories from his medical residency at Johns Hopkins. "And what about you, Isabella?" Aunt Margaret asked, turning her attention to me with the kind of polite interest reserved for obligatory family conversations. "Still pursuing your artistic interests?" The table quieted slightly. My artistic interests had become something of a family joke over the past few years. "Still working in creative consulting," I replied, taking a sip of champagne. "Creative consulting," Uncle Robert repeated with barely concealed amusement. "That's a fancy way of saying unemployed, isn't it?" Nervous laughter rippled around the table. I smiled and said nothing. "I mean, we all know about the trust fund," Sarah added with false sympathy. "It's nice that your parents have been able to support your exploration phase." More knowing looks. My trust fund had indeed been funding my lifestyle for the past 8 years, though not in the way my family imagined. "Isabella's always been the artistic one," Mom's sister Diane explained to her dinner companion. "Creative types often take longer to find their path." "Some never find it at all," Daniel muttered, earning a sharp look from his mother. The conversation moved on to safer topics. Daniel's wedding plans, Sarah's partnership track, Michael's research publication. I resumed my role as the family's talented but impractical youngest generation member, the one who'd chosen creativity over commerce and was paying the predictable price. What none of them knew was that my artistic interests had generated more revenue in the past 5 years than all their careers combined. While they saw me as the trust fund kid who dabbled in creative pursuits, I had actually built Sterling Creative Solutions into the most sought-after brand consulting firm on the West Coast. My client list read like a Fortune 500 directory: Apple, Netflix, Tesla, Google, Amazon. When major corporations needed to rebrand, launch new products, or recover from PR disasters, they called Sterling Creative Solutions. When tech startups needed to transform from garage operations into billion-dollar companies, they hired us to craft their public identity. But I operated under the business name Sterling Creative Solutions, and I deliberately kept my personal involvement private. My family saw me attending art classes and creative workshops, without realizing these were client meetings and strategy sessions with the world's most powerful brands. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ's voice boomed across the ballroom, "please welcome Robert and Catherine Williams for their anniversary speech." Applause filled the room as my parents took the small stage at the front of the ballroom. Dad looked distinguished in his black tuxedo, Mom radiant in her burgundy gown. 40 years of marriage had been good to them. "Thank you all for celebrating this milestone with us," Dad began, his voice carrying easily across the crowd. "Catherine and I have been blessed with an incredible journey together." More applause. I watched from my table, genuinely happy for their celebration despite the family dynamics that had placed me at the periphery rather than the center of their pride. "We've raised 3 wonderful children," Mom continued, taking the microphone. "Our eldest, Richard, who couldn't be here tonight due to his deployment overseas, serves our country with honor in the Air Force." Proud murmurs from the crowd. Richard's military career had always been a source of family pride. "Our middle child, Amanda, has built a successful dental practice and given us 2 beautiful grandchildren." Amanda waved from table 2, beaming with well-deserved recognition. "And our youngest, Isabella," Mom paused, looking in my direction, "has always marched to the beat of her own drum." That was Mom's diplomatic way of acknowledging me without actually praising anything specific. However, Dad's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "Tonight's celebration isn't just about looking back. It's also about looking forward and making some important family announcements." I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. Family announcements were rarely good news for me. "As many of you know," Dad continued, "we've been fortunate enough to provide trust funds for our children, helping them start their adult lives with financial security. Several relatives nodded approvingly. The Williams family trust funds were a point of pride, representing Dad's success in business and his commitment to his children's futures. Richard used his trust fund to purchase his first home before his military deployment. Amanda used hers to establish her dental practice. More appreciative murmurs from the crowd. Isabella has been using hers to pursue her artistic interests for the past 8 years. The phrase, artistic interests, carried just enough emphasis to make it clear this was different from her siblings' practical investments. However, Dad's voice grew firmer. Catherine and I have made a difficult decision about Isabella's financial support. The ballroom fell silent. 300 people turned their attention to whatever family drama was about to unfold. At their anniversary, Dad announced, "Your trust fund is gone, we spent it all." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. "We've liquidated Isabella's remaining trust fund to cover some unexpected medical expenses and home renovations," Dad continued, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "At 29 years old, it's time for her to become financially independent." Added, "Time to get a real job like your cousins." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Someone at table 8 audibly winced. Aunt Margaret covered her mouth in shock. "We love Isabella dearly," Mom continued, "but 8 years of funding her artistic exploration has been long enough. She needs to join the real world and build a practical career like her cousins." I sat quietly, processing this very public financial intervention while 300 wedding guests witnessed my family's attempt at tough love. "Isabella," Dad's voice boomed across the ballroom, "we know this seems harsh, but it's for your own good. You have a college degree and plenty of family connections. It's time to use them." The entire ballroom was staring at me now, waiting for my response to this public declaration of financial abandonment. I stood up slowly, smoothing my black cocktail dress. Every eye in the room followed my movement. "Dad, Mom," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, "I appreciate your concern for my financial independence." "Good," Dad said, seeming relieved by my calm response. "We were worried you might be upset." "Not upset at all. In fact, your timing is perfect." I reached into my small evening clutch and pulled out a business card. I handed Dad my business card and said, "Call me Monday." Dad looked confused but accepted the card. The crowd watched as he read it. He looked at it and went pale. "What is it, Robert?" Mom asked, noticing his sudden change in color. Dad's hand was shaking as he held the card. "Because the company name was..." Dad's voice trailed off as he read aloud, "Sterling Creative Solutions. Chief Executive Officer Isabella Williams." The ballroom erupted in confused whispers. "Sterling Creative Solutions?" Uncle Robert repeated. "That's the company that rebranded Microsoft's entire gaming division. And Tesla's charging network," Daniel added weakly. "They handled Netflix's international expansion campaign," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. I smiled at my family's shocked faces. "Isabella," Dad's voice was barely a whisper, "are you telling us you own Sterling Creative Solutions?" "I founded it 8 years ago. We're now the largest independent brand consulting firm on the West Coast." But you live so modestly," Mom protested. "I live according to my values, not my bank balance." "Your bank balance?" Dad repeated faintly. "Last year, Sterling Creative Solutions generated $47 million in revenue. My personal net worth is approximately $38 million. The ballroom was completely silent except for the soft background music that continued playing despite the family drama unfolding on stage. "$38 million? Aunt Margaret's voice carried across the room. "Conservative estimate. Our Apple contract alone is worth $15 million over 3 years. "Apple." Daniel's investment banking confidence had completely evaporated. "We redesigned their entire retail experience last year. The new store layouts you've been seeing? Those are based on our brand psychology research." I looked around the ballroom at 300 stunned faces. The Google homepage refresh, Amazon's new marketplace interface, Tesla's charging station experience, all Sterling Creative Solutions projects. "But you never said." Mom started. "I tried to tell you. Remember last Christmas when I mentioned working on a major tech client's visual identity? You said it sounded like playing with colors and suggested I consider real graphic design work. Dad flinched visibly. Remember when I offered to help redesign the marketing for Amanda's dental practice? You said family shouldn't mix business with favors. Amanda looked like she might faint. Every time I tried to share my actual work, you dismissed it as hobby projects or artistic dabbling. So I stopped trying to convince you and just focused on building my business. But the trust fund, Mom said weakly. You've been living off the trust fund. I've been living off my business income. The trust fund has been sitting untouched in its original investment account, generating returns. Untouched. Dad's voice cracked. I never needed it. Sterling Creative Solutions has been profitable since year 2. Then why didn't you tell us you were successful? Because you preferred thinking I wasn't successful. It made you feel better about being the responsible parents who were supporting their impractical daughter. The weight of that statement settled over the ballroom like a heavy blanket. Isabella, Aunt Margaret called from her table, if you're worth $38 million, why do you dress so modestly? Because my work is about helping other people build powerful brands. I prefer to stay in the background. But your car, your apartment. Uncle Robert protested. My car is a Tesla Model S that I got directly from Tesla's CEO after we completed their rebrand. My apartment is a downtown penthouse that I purchased with cash 3 years ago. A penthouse. Sarah repeated weakly. 4,000 square feet with a private terrace. I use it for client entertaining. Then where do you live day to day? Daniel asked. I have homes in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York. I travel frequently for client work. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Isabella, Dad's voice was barely audible. When you said call me Monday, what did you mean? I meant call my office if you'd like to discuss business opportunities. Sterling Creative Solutions is always looking for strategic partnerships. Strategic partnerships? Dad, you've run a successful manufacturing company for 30 years. We could help you rebrand for modern markets and expand your customer base. You want to help my business? I've wanted to help your business for years. But every time I offered strategic advice, you said I didn't understand real business. Dad looked down at the business card again, reading the address. This address. This is the Sterling Tower downtown. We own the building. Floors 12 through 15 are Sterling Creative Solutions. The rest we lease to other creative companies. You own the Sterling Tower? Mom's voice was faint. We bought it 2 years ago when we outgrew our original office space. I looked around the ballroom at my extended family's shocked faces. Uncle Robert, remember when you said creative consulting was a fancy way of saying unemployed? Uncle Robert had gone completely pale. Sterling Creative Solutions employs 43 people full-time and works with a network of over 200 freelance specialists worldwide. 200 people? He whispered. Graphic designers, brand strategists, market researchers, digital specialists, cultural anthropologists. When Fortune 500 companies need to understand how to connect with consumers, they hire teams of experts. I turned to my cousin Sarah. Sarah, remember when you said my work was just playing with colors and fonts? Sarah couldn't speak. Last month, we completed a rebrand for a pharmaceutical company that increased their market share by 18% in 3 months. That translates to approximately $200 million in additional revenue. 200 million? Daniel's voice cracked. Brand psychology is the science of understanding how visual and cultural elements influence human behavior. When done correctly, it's one of the most powerful business tools available. The DJ, seemingly unsure whether to continue the celebration or pause for the family revelation, had quietly turned off the background music. The ballroom was completely silent. Isabella, Mom said, tears forming in her eyes, we had no idea. You had no idea because you never asked. You assumed my work was hobby art instead of professional consulting. But why didn't you correct us? I tried to correct you. Multiple times. But you preferred your assumptions to my explanations. We should have listened. Yes, you should have. Dad stepped closer to me, still holding my business card. Isabella, when you offered to help Amanda's dental practice, were you being serious? Completely serious. Medical practices are actually one of our specialties. We've helped dozens of healthcare providers modernize their patient experience and expand their practices. Amanda finally found her voice. How much would something like that cost? For family? Pro bono. For the experience of working with a healthcare provider who trusts our recommendations. Pro bono means free, Daniel explained weakly to the relatives who might not know the term. I know what pro bono means, I said with a slight smile. I also know what family means even when family doesn't always act like family. Isabella, Uncle Robert said, his voice shaky, I owe you an apology. For what specifically? For making jokes about your career without understanding what your career actually was. And for assuming you were unsuccessful without ever asking about your success. Thank you for saying that. The ballroom was beginning to buzz with quiet conversations as guests processed this revelation and shared their own knowledge of Sterling Creative Solutions' high-profile projects. Ladies and gentlemen, Dad said into the microphone, his voice stronger now, I think we need to revise our family announcement. The crowd quieted again. It appears that our daughter Isabella doesn't need a trust fund because she's built her own empire. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. And it appears that we owe her a significant apology for not recognizing her achievements. Robert, Mom said, taking the microphone, Isabella, could you join us up here? I made my way to the small stage, conscious of 300 pairs of eyes tracking my movement. Isabella, Mom said, addressing both me and the crowd, would you be willing to tell everyone what you actually do for work? Because apparently we've been getting it wrong for 8 years. I took the microphone, looking out at the ballroom full of family and friends who had just witnessed my parents publicly question my financial viability. I'm the founder and CEO of Sterling Creative Solutions, I began. We help major corporations and emerging companies develop brand identities that connect with consumers on emotional and psychological levels. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Our work combines market research, cultural analysis, design psychology, and strategic planning to create brands that don't just look good, but actually influence behavior and drive business results. Can you give us an example? Someone called from the crowd. Last year we worked with a tech startup that was struggling to differentiate itself in a crowded market. 6 months after implementing our brand strategy, they secured $40 million in Series B funding and were acquired by Google for $200 million. Impressed murmurs circulated through the ballroom. We also worked with a traditional retailer that was losing market share to online competitors. Our cultural research identified specific emotional triggers that their target demographic valued. Within 8 months of launching their new brand identity, their revenue increased by 35%. How did you learn to do this kind of work? Aunt Margaret asked. Combination of formal education, practical experience, and natural intuition about human psychology. I have degrees in marketing and behavioral psychology, plus 8 years of working directly with consumers and executives to understand what motivates decision-making. And this is profitable work? Uncle Robert asked, still seeming dazed. Very profitable. Companies pay substantial fees for work that directly impacts their revenue. Our smallest projects start at $50,000. Our largest contracts run into the millions. Millions? Sarah repeated. Our 3-year contract with Netflix was worth $12 million. We're currently negotiating a $15 million contract with Amazon for their international expansion branding. The ballroom was completely silent again. Isabella, Dad said, I feel like I need to ask your forgiveness. For what? For spending 8 years treating you like a financial burden when you were actually more successful than anyone else in our family. Dad, you don't need to apologize for not knowing about my success. You need to apologize for treating me badly based on your assumptions about my lack of success. I do apologize for that. Sincerely. Thank you. And Isabella, Mom added, we never should have announced your financial situation publicly like that. You announced your understanding of my financial situation, which turned out to be completely wrong. Yes, it did. I looked out at the ballroom full of relatives who had spent years watching my parents worry about my impractical career choices. I think there's been a misunderstanding about what success looks like, I said into the microphone. My family assumed that because I don't display wealth traditionally, I must not have wealth. Because I work in creative fields, my work must not be valuable. Because I live quietly, I must not have significant achievements. I paused, making eye contact with various family members. But some of the most successful people in the world live modestly, work in creative industries and prefer substance over show. My net worth is higher than most people in this room, but my priority has always been building something meaningful rather than displaying something impressive. What made you choose that approach? Daniel asked. I learned early that when people know you're wealthy, they treat you differently. Some become resentful, others become opportunistic, most become less genuine. I prefer relationships based on who I am rather than what I have. So you've been hiding your success? I've been living according to my values instead of other people's expectations. Dad stepped forward and took my hand. Isabella, would you be willing to forgive your old-fashioned parents for not understanding your very modern approach to success? I would be willing to build a better relationship going forward. What would that look like? It would look like you asking about my work instead of assuming you understand it. It would look like respecting my choices even when they're different from traditional approaches. It would look like treating me like an accomplished adult instead of like a struggling child. We can do that, Mom said quickly. We want to do that, Dad added. Then let's start tonight. I handed the microphone back to Dad and stepped down from the stage. But instead of returning to table 15, I walked to the family table and took the empty seat between my parents. For the first time in 8 years, I sat at the center of my family's celebration instead of at the periphery. The rest of the evening transformed completely. Instead of polite questions about my artistic interests, relatives approached me with genuine curiosity about brand consulting and business strategy. Daniel asked thoughtful questions about market psychology. Sarah wanted to understand how brand identity could be applied to legal services. Michael was fascinated by the intersection of behavioral psychology and consumer decision-making. But the most meaningful conversation happened during the father-daughter dance. Isabella, Dad said as we swayed to Frank Sinatra, I have a confession to make. What's that? I've been proud of you all along, even when I thought you were struggling. Proud of what? Proud that you chose to follow your passion instead of just following money. Proud that you were willing to take risks and try creative approaches. Proud that you stayed true to yourself even when we pressured you to be more conventional. But you were also worried about my financial future. Terrified about your financial future. But still proud of your character. And now I'm proud of your character and amazed by your success. But mostly, I'm ashamed of myself for not trusting that your character would lead to success. Dad, character doesn't always lead to financial success. But integrity usually leads to some kind of meaningful success. And you've always had integrity. Thank you for saying that. Isabella, could I ask you a business question? Of course. Do you think there's a way to help our family manufacturing company reach younger consumers? We've been losing market share to companies that seem more modern. I smiled. Dad, I thought you'd never ask. 6 months later, Dad's manufacturing company had undergone a complete brand transformation that I designed and implemented at no charge. Their new identity resonated with Millennial and Gen Z consumers, leading to a 40% increase in online sales and partnerships with 3 major retailers. Amanda's dental practice had also been rebranded, focusing on patient experience and modern healthcare aesthetics. Her practice expanded from 1 location to 3, and she'd been featured in a dental industry magazine as an example of innovative patient care. But more importantly, our family had learned to operate on curiosity instead of assumptions, respect instead of judgment, and genuine interest instead of polite dismissal. Isabella, Mom said over Sunday dinner at my penthouse, I keep thinking about that anniversary party. What about it? I keep thinking about how confident you were when we announced that your trust fund was gone. Why wouldn't I be confident? I hadn't been using the trust fund. But we didn't know that. From our perspective, we were cutting off your only source of income. From your perspective, yes. Weren't you angry that we would do that so publicly? I was disappointed that you would make assumptions about my finances and then announce those assumptions to 300 people without ever asking if the assumptions were accurate. What if your assumptions had been right? What if I really had been living off the trust fund? Then I would have been hurt that you chose to cut off my financial support in front of 300 people instead of having a private conversation about transitioning to independence. Either way, we handled it badly. You handled it based on incomplete information and questionable assumptions. But you also handled it with good intentions. Good intentions don't excuse poor execution. No, but they do make forgiveness easier. Dad looked up from his dessert. Isabella, can I ask what happened to the trust fund? If you never used it. It's still there earning returns. Currently worth about $200,000. What do you plan to do with it? I was thinking of donating it to a scholarship fund for students pursuing creative business degrees. Students like you were? Students who want to prove that creativity and commerce can work together, but who might not have family financial support to take the risks required to build something innovative. That's perfect, Mom said. It feels right. Isabella, Dad said, I have one more confession. What's that? I've been bragging about you to everyone I meet. My golf partners, business associates, the neighbors. You don't need to brag about me. I know I don't need to. Want to. For 8 years, I missed opportunities to be proud of my daughter because I was too worried about her future to see her present. You see my present now. I see it and I'm amazed by it. The most important thing is that you see me. Really see me instead of seeing your assumptions about me. We do see you now. And we like what we see. The greatest victory hadn't been proving my family wrong about my financial dependence. It had been teaching them that success comes in many forms, that traditional displays of wealth aren't the only measures of achievement, and that sometimes the people who look the least successful are actually changing industries and building empires. But more than that, we'd learned that family relationships work better when they're built on genuine curiosity rather than comfortable assumptions, when they're based on who people actually are rather than who we think they should be. Sometimes the best revenge isn't showing people how wrong they were about your failures. Sometimes it's showing them how limited their definition of success was, and helping them expand their understanding of what achievement can look like. The trust fund had been a symbol of their support, but it had also been a symbol of their assumption that I needed support. Learning that I'd never needed their financial help had been shocking, but learning that I'd built something more valuable than their support had been transformative. We'd moved from a relationship based on their worry about my future to a relationship based on their pride in my present. And that transformation had made us not just a family but a team,